Stop the insanity. Get focused on what really matters in life. Your faith, your family, your finances, and your future. Now sit back and change the trajectory of your life. This is Money for Life, brought to you by the 100-Year Savings Solution. Are you concerned about the markets? Stop taking unnecessary risks with your money while also getting great benefits. Visit us at 100yearsavings.com. Now, let's welcome your Money for Life hosts, Teresa Kuhn and Rick Sapio.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Money for Life. I am Teresa Kuhn, and I am with my partner, Rick Sapio. And one of the things you may not know about Rick Sapio, he is known for being an expert at facilitating war rooms. Well, what exactly is a war room? Well, a war room is a gathering of the key employees of a business to analyze what's the state of the union, so to speak, doing a SWOT analysis and prioritizing the objectives for a following time period, let's say for the next year. And Rick just got out of doing a war room with his team for one of his companies. And so, Rick, I think this is a perfect opportunity for us to dive deep into how you facilitate these war rooms, what the advantages are, disadvantages, what you've seen over the years in terms of you were doing these 20 years ago, what's changed now today. You just got out of doing a war room. What was different about your war room today versus what you've done in the past?
Thank you, Teresa. Well, you asked a lot of questions. So first of all, the reason we call it a war room is because you want to assess all of your assets in a business. Families can do war rooms as well. And then you want to assess what can we do with those assets. And then you want to come up with a strategic plan. And then you want to come up with tactics to execute on that plan. And today versus 20 years ago, I have found that people just don't have time. Every nook and cranny of their life is full. So if you remember, Teresa, when you had a meeting 20 years ago and it said there's a meeting from 9 to 12, that's a planning meeting. You showed up from 9 to 12, probably with the agenda in your hand and probably with a note paper. Now you show up with a smartphone, a laptop, most likely another device. They're all open, they're in front of you, and very few people are paying attention. I thought when my 7 executives got together with me that they were going to storm out when I said, we're going to shorten the war room to 3 2-hour periods the first day and have an hour and a half between for you guys to do all your electronic crap. So no electronics in the room. And I thought they were going to have a heart attack. But what about fantasy football? There's an addiction to all this crap. And it doesn't allow the war room to work as well as it used to work, because deep work, that's the name of the book that allows us to learn about what happens when we focus on deep work for a long time. So I summarize what a war room is. It's a once-a-year gathering for a family, for a company, for an executive team, for a group that has something to accomplish. And if you don't think you have time for a war room, I believe that the process of planning creates so much more success and so much more time. So how specific, Teresa, do you want to get on war rooms? I've done many, many of them over the years. Just finished one, as you mentioned. We actually did it for 2 whole days. And when I say 2 whole days, I'm talking about 2 whole days in the 2020 era, which is, like I mentioned, 6 hours, 2 hours separated by an hour and a half twice. So it was a total of 12 hours in a room around the table.
Well, I think my first question is, did somebody really say fantasy football, or were you just exaggerating?
I've read that there's a fantasy football addiction in the world right now. I've also read that there's addictions to all kinds of stuff on smartphones. So I was not exaggerating about that. I was exaggerating that someone mentioned fantasy football because they would never mention that to me.
Got it. Okay. Well, just checking, because these are 7 key executives. And I think if I was going into like a boardroom setting for a war room, the last thing I'd mention is, wait, I can't turn off my electronics because I've got to look at my fantasy football teams. But I digress. So let's start with the layout. You said you had 2 6-hour days of just working on the war room. How do you start? Are you starting with just brainstorming? Are you leading objectives to determine what the objectives, the most important things to focus on for the following year? Like, how do you start this off? Well, actually, you know what? I have a better question to start. How do you set up the war room and get everyone to buy in to do a war room? Because I know that there are people that sometimes think it's not necessary. That's just another meeting. Lots of us have just too many meetings. So why is this such an important meeting to do?
So let me try to answer everything you asked. I think you asked like 3 or 4 questions in there. So the first thing is the setup for the meeting. You want to send an email out to your key people that you're doing the meeting with and say, we're all going to meet in this room. And I always say that I'm going to be the facilitator or the quarterback of the meeting. The goal is to extract as much information from you as I can. So organize your day to be fully present from this time to this time. And generally, if I was doing a 1-day war room, I would have the room set up very specifically where there's a screen that everybody can see, where I can pull up an Excel or a Google document spreadsheet. And I start every day the same way. We have breakfast. Then we go into the room. There's no food or drink in the room so people can be present. And we start the meeting with a SWOT analysis. And a SWOT analysis is first we brainstorm as a team for the strengths. That's the S in SWOT. Then the weaknesses of the company or the situation that we're war rooming. O stands for the opportunities and T stands for the threats. So SWOT analysis means strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so the first thing I did, it took about 2 hours, was, all right, what are the strengths of this business that we're war rooming right now? And that's a verb, war rooming. And I just pull it out. I'm typing and I'm literally making a list of the strengths. And the strengths are that, we've been in business X number of years. We've got a great executive team. We have these assets. We've got these customers, whatever. Then W is what are the weaknesses that we have to consider? The weaknesses are we have not invested enough in technology. We don't have a web presence. We don't have enough cash, whatever your weaknesses are. And then opportunities is probably the best because now that you did the strengths and weaknesses, you can then put a long list of all the opportunities down. That was our longest list by far. And then the last one was, what are the threats? The threats could be who's winning the next election, because depending on who wins, that might threaten your business. Could be that the life cycle of a client is shrinking. We used to have clients that paid us for 10 years and now they're 2 years. A threat could be there's a massive competitor coming down the pipe. So once we have the list of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, we take a break. When we get back, we look at all the opportunities, we rank them. And the way we ranked them, we had about 50. And I say, all right, is it a yes or a no? Are we going to pursue this in the next year? And so people say yes or no. So now you shrink the list down. So let's say it goes from 50 to 25. Now we're going to rank them A, B, or C. A means this has a high revenue opportunity or return on investment or high result if we focus on it now. And so we rank them that way. And so at the end, in this 2-day one that I did, we ended up with 5 key objectives at the end of the day. Now, once you have your 5 key objectives, you then want to go to your team, hopefully at the war room, but you want to assign the key objectives to your key team members, and then you want to come up with all the to-dos to achieve that objective. And what happens from a war room is you get people to recommit to the company, recommit to the objectives of the company, and opt out. I have had so many war rooms end up where somebody comes to me the next day and says, you know what, I'm just not cut out for this. I didn't realize that that was our objective, or I didn't realize that I'm being left in the dust. And you and I had a teammate recently opt out. And it's ironic, this person opted out when we were planning a war room because it's very confrontational to be responsible for objectives and taking a company to the next level. It just is. So that's the essence of it. And people say, well, I get the essence of it. I'll just do it my way. And the reality is there are tried and true ways to make war rooms more effective. And maybe we could drill down on that.
Yes. Well, you certainly have been working with this recipe and it's worked very well for you. How did you learn the concept of war rooming and how did you practice that before you became a facilitator?
In my 20s, I focused a lot on turnarounds. So the small team of executives that I worked for, we looked at broken companies and we looked at opportunities to turn them around. And what we realized very quickly is unless you get all the key decision makers in one room, and unless you understand all the assets of the business, all the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Unless you had that, how can you take the business to the next level? How can you increase the odds of turning it around? So we talked about only SWOT, but as you go through a war room, there's all kinds of lists you can come up with. You can come up with a list, as I just mentioned. What are all the assets of the business? What are the key people? Who are the people that need to get off the bus? What states or offices do we need to close down? You can go through any variety of different brainstorming subjects. But the point is, how did I learn this? I learned it because I saw businesses in crisis, and I did this through my 20s, 6 years, in fact, of really deep under the hood, learning how business can be turned around and be more effective. And that's where it came from.
This is a message from our sponsor, the 100-Year Savings Solution. Rick and I do these podcasts because we want to impact people's lives in 4 areas: their faith, their family, their finances, and their future. And with the 100-Year Savings Solution, it gives you more options to live a better life in those 4 areas. It is a specially designed whole life insurance policy that gives you more for your money than you'll ever get from a bank, a CD, or the traditional savings solution. Go to 100yearsavings.com to learn more. In terms of skill set, there is a very specific skill set regarding turning around companies, just like there's a different skill set for starting a company and a skill set for managing a company during a high growth period of time. What do you think are your strengths? Is it turning around companies that are in distress or in crisis?
I like that question because the older I get, the more clear it becomes what I'm good at. And I can tell you, I spent a lot of my career not focused on things that I'm good at. I am not good at growing a small company where you have to enroll people, where you have to create sales from nothing, where you have to ask people to do more than they want to do. I am a much, much better short-term fixer. And what I mean by that is if you put me inside of a big company, like a family business that's broken, that needs to change quickly, I am really good at being a fixer inside of a massive opportunity where we have to restructure debt and restructure leases and eliminate product lines and eliminate executives and eliminate staff members in order to save the business. That's what I'm really good at. Why? Because I can focus for as many hours as a situation needs to be focused on in order to get that result. But that level of intensity, which I'm good at, I'm not a stainer. I'm not the kind of person that can stay in a business and, high five and do the growth over years. I'm a much better fixer if there's a carcass that can be saved. And most of the time there is. Companies that go bankrupt don't realize that there's often a really strong skeleton, but they get caught up in the fact that there's not enough money to pay the bills without thinking that everything can be restructured in a crisis.
So Rick, would you call yourself a hatchet man to a certain degree? Like, I think in movies, they're depicted as a really dark figure that gets off on firing people. That's not you. You're talking about going in there very surgically and very strategically firing people or getting rid of people that don't meet the short-term objective to revise the business or bring the business up from the dead.
Yeah, I think it's a very different person. There was a guy that I think he's passed away now, Chainsaw Al, and he prided himself on taking a chainsaw to companies. And oftentimes those type of people who like to enrich themselves at the expense of the company, that's the typical turnaround hatchet men or woman type of personality. I like to work on behalf of the principals, the owners of the business. So I would like to come in, get a significant stake in the ownership of the business, as opposed to charging the business millions of dollars when it's already hampered. Come in and think like an owner. Think, if we save this business, what can we sell it for later? So as it relates to the employees, the key employees that really want to be there and roll their sleeves up, they win, because they get to keep their job and they get to grow a business that was on its deathbed. And so I always say, we're not eliminating people, we're actually saving people. And it's very hard for people to understand this concept. And I've talked to my Italian relatives about it and they don't get it. So I'm saying, if a company has 500 employees and it goes bankrupt and 500 people lose their job, that's bad. If the company's going bankrupt and we're able to save the business and keep 300 jobs and save the business and have the business contribute to society for another 10 years or whatever the length of time is, that's good. But it's hard for people to wrap their head around that concept. I believe in saving businesses that are savable because they create a win for society, a win for ownership, a win for the employees that stay, and a win for the community.
So, who are the mentors, your business mentors who work with war rooms? I know Warren Buffett is one of them. I don't know about Lee Iacocca. He had a different style in terms of his management and what his focus was, but speak to that.
I've had a lot of mentors, and the old school business person would have these war rooms, and they wouldn't call it that. That's the name that we've come up with, because if you're going to war, which business is, you've got to assess your resources, right? That's what the SWOT analysis does. You've got to assess your people. You've got to assess the opportunities that you have in front of you. You've got to think about the threats, et cetera. I think, when you look around the world and you look at companies that continue to grow year in and year out, and they're constantly innovating, those companies have a tremendous amount of meetings where all the decision makers get together and they fight and they cajole and they sell and they beat each other up. And that's what teamwork is all about. You're not going to win the Super Bowl if everybody's just singing Kumbaya. You've got to hold people accountable. You've got to talk things out. You've got to figure out what strategy is. You've got to argue over, is this the right set of values for the business? Is this the right set of products for the business? So I would, rather than characterizing it, Teresa, as what a mentor did or taught me, I would characterize it as, if you're in an entity of any kind, I don't care what it is, a nonprofit, a family, a business, etc., you have got to have at least once a year this type of meeting. Hands down, no ifs, ands, or buts. It's universal inside any successful organization. And here's the funny thing, very few people do it. And that's what really bums me out.
So, Rick, in your notes that you use, your implementation guide for the War Room, you've got a quote, and I absolutely love this quote. I use it all the time when it comes to finance and money and business and education, just life, right? When is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When is the second best time to plant a tree? Today. When I get asked, hey, I'm middle-aged, I want to go back to school, but I'm just so old, or I want to do this and I'm old and I haven't done it, or whatever. It's like, well, unless you're thinking of dying, unless you think you're going to die in the next couple of years, you're still going to be that age 4, 5, 6, 7 years from now. So would you rather have the opportunity to start something now with no regrets? Don't look back. If you haven't done this War Room, you can start right now doing a War Room for your family, for your business, for your relationships, for, dating, let's say. If you're not getting the results you want in dating, I would set up a War Room with the people that I respect that have figured out relationships and find out what's going on. I mean, you could use a War Room for so many things.
Yeah, I have a friend that always says, stop, ground, center. We don't have enough time built into our lives anymore to stop, ground yourself, center yourself, and then restart. And I think a war room is great for any organization, including small ones or groups of people that you just mentioned, solving a problem like who you're going to marry. That's an interesting one. Consider that if you could somehow shut the noise off, shut the cell phone off, put everything aside, get the important people in the room on any topic, and plant that tree now, the results are always, 100% of the time, they're always better than you thought. And I've done this more than, I don't know how many times, I don't want to share a number, but for the last 30 years, I've been doing these meetings, and the results 100% of the time exceed what people expected. I grabbed one of my executives who was the most skeptical about this meeting because he had to fly in town. And I said, 1 to 10, what was the meeting? And he's like, well, I would give it a 10, but it was more like a 15. Like, what the hell does that mean? I thought he was going to be negative. He said it was a 15 because it was 50% better than my wildest expectations. And this was the most negative person. So get started, learn how to do a war room. You could figure this out on your own because these have been meetings that have been going on for 2,000 years as people prepare for any endeavor.
And Rick, I just want to say and offer it out to the audience. You've got Business Finishing School. You could find it at businessfinishingschool.com. You have a whole module that teaches the war room, and you've got an implementation guide and you've got a sample agenda. That module alone is worth so much, absolutely so much money. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that this information can be found at businessfinishingschool.com.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Money for Life.
You have just experienced the Money for Life podcast, brought to you by the 100-Year Savings Solution. Implement these strategies today and create a life by design. For more information, visit 100yearsavings.com. Have a blessed day.